Welcome, everyone, to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Pete. I'm glad to be here again. We've been recording quite a bit lately, so excited for a really cool conversation today.
Yes, and our guest this week is really long overdue. I've been dying to have him on. Please welcome HR tech executive, global workforce expert, the founder of Atlas, and more recently, the founder and CEO at Helios, Mr. Rick Hammell. Welcome, Rick.
The crowd goes wild, right?
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Julie, for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and I can't wait to jump into this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I want to learn about what you guys have been building. I know there's been some really interesting topics in the news around remote work and maybe global workforce challenges, and wanted to dig into some of that and see how you guys are solving that and what your thoughts are on these things, because I think there's a lot of controversy still around this. But one of the things we ask all of our guests, Rick, and it's interesting, I feel like a lot of the answers are very, very similar, is how did you get into HR and why in the world do you stay in HR? Thankfully that you do.
Well, I'll tell you, my journey started actually pretty young. So I was working in a hotel chain, and I was working in front desk and while I was going to school. And I realized there were a couple things that were happening at that particular hotel that I felt like employees needed to be protected, if that makes sense. And as I've gotten promoted through other avenues within operations, I realized that I really wanted to have a focus in HR. My HR focus was really to help people and be able to support and to make sure companies were doing things the right way. So I always say my Achilles heel is, and everything that drives me within business is a way to help people in creating equitable opportunities for them. If that's in expanding their businesses, or if it's just making sure that they are in a safe environment within the work environment, that was really important to me. So got in HR that way, and it just evolved over time and over the years. But the core foundation is really just to help.
Yeah. And so staying is the helping people part, right? It sounds like.
That is correct.
A man on a mission.
I know. I love it.
You got the feel good bug, Rick.
No, I think we find a lot of folks enjoy the challenge, right? And they find that this isn't what maybe the external world thinks of HR and the impact it can have. So love that you made your way here, and really appreciate that you've managed to stay or intended to stay. A lot of folks, I feel like they try to escape and it pulls them right back in. So awesome, man.
It's addictive. HR is, it's not for the faint heart, but I will say that we are able to accomplish a lot. It's not just the people department. I mean, we're not just pushing paper, we're really creating strategy. And I think that's fulfilling.
Yeah, driving business outcomes, I think, is so important in any of these business functions. But for HR, right, people is where kind of the rubber meets the road, if you will. So, yeah, I love it. Look, Rick, I wanted to talk to you about some of the recent sort of hybrid working headlines. Right, it feels like there's been so many lately. One of which is the recent. I'm sure you probably saw it. Right, Google's ex-CEO Eric Schmidt made the statement I think he was presenting in front of Stanford University. And he mentioned, this idea that Google has been hindered by remote work, right? And that their ability to compete with some of the more emerging startups, like maybe an OpenAI, has more or less suppressed their innovation, right? And he actually quoted as saying that Google decided work-life balance, going home early, and working from home was more important than winning, which is a very, very controversial statement. I don't agree with it. But Rick, what do you think about this? I mean, I think this is very indicative of some of the trends that we've seen coming out of the C-suites in the attitude towards remote work. And I have a theory about it, but would love to just hear your thoughts on this.
First and foremost, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Businesses have had to change since 2020. They've had to figure out what type of culture they're going to have. What's worked in the past may not work in the future. I remember when we got into the COVID kind of era, and we had to inform employees that to work from home, and it was fighting tooth and nail. If you remember that, people did not want to work from home at that point. The employee base started to realize that they had more time to spend with their families. They were able to get more things done. And they were able to, that hour and a half that they were commuting, they can get started and they can end their days a little bit earlier. So that 8-hour day was always felt like more like a 10-hour day. And now they're actually operating an 8-hour day, and they're seeing they're getting things done. On the flip side of that, organizations, both positive and negative, they've had to figure out how to make sure they coalesce their teams to be able to, understand the vision, the goal, things that were a lot easier to do. As you already know, you can do a lot more in person than you can do on a Zoom or a Teams call. But organizations have been, the most successful ones have been able to look at other opportunities to bring together teams to make sure everyone's on the same page, leveraging technology to be able to do that. So I think there's a pro and con to what he's saying. But and the fact that he said, look, they are going to choose work-life balance over winning, I don't think that's a good statement. I think the statement should have said, look, we're going to invest into our teams, and our teams are going, that return on investment into the team is going to allow us to win in the long run. And I think that, there is a way that you can do that through collaboration. I think there's a way that you can do that through innovation and technology. I don't think you have to have one or the other. I think you can have both. The most strategic or the most innovative organizations are going to be successful in both. They're going to find a way to balance out their staff and then be able to do that and still be innovative and expand. My organization, we were very much in offices in the past, pre-COVID, and then we had to figure out how to be successful outside of that. And during COVID, we continued to grow. We grew 48, 68, 70% over time being remote. We realized the success behind that. So it's just, how are you going to be able to catch up and be able to transform your organizations in that moment? I think the most successful ones have been able to do it successfully. The ones who feel like it's a challenge, I think they need to really look at and tag into their people and ask questions and how they think they can get people to be able to be successful in a remote environment.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said, and I don't think that I think what you're alluding to there was that a one size fits all really isn't a great idea, right? It's got to be very. I mean, you can't be agile if you don't think agile, I suppose, in the beginning, right? So you've got to kind of have that what's best for our organization, our environment, our culture. But I think this idea of like drawing a line in the sand is really, really dangerous, and we've seen some firms doing that, right? I think IBM did it. I've heard some others are doing it. And I actually think that some of this is rooted in the fact that I think that many of the leaders that are out there, especially ones that have, are in the latter generations, for the lack of other ways to say it, lack the skill set to actually run and manage and successfully lead a hybrid workforce. I actually don't think it's all the workforce's problem. I think some of it is the leadership aren't positioned with the skills to lead in this new hybrid environment. And I think it's something that it's like we know it, but we don't want to talk about it, right? And no one ever calls out the executives for that. It's just, well, it's not right for us, or it's this or it's that, but it's never the skill set of the leadership, right? Do you think that's a gap out there?
Look, let's be frank about this. As a leader, I go by a playbook that I'm used to. I've
Yeah.
learned, I've evolved, and I know what works well for me and how I want to run my organization. And so, yes, I think to your point is it's foreign, it's new. The ability to evolve sometimes, especially depending on where you are in your career and that can be a challenge. Look, I think that the data has shown that a lot of businesses have been a lot more successful with remote work. They've been able to, the dollars they're investing into these office spaces, they've been able to reinvest into the business and increase profits behind that. Bring in a really good technology, automate certain things, get more work done. But you're absolutely right. I think it's a mentality that this is my playbook. I've always had this playbook. This is how I want to operate, and this does not fit within that kind of criteria.
Yeah.
I think leaders have to look at that and go, okay, I'm going to look in a mirror and say, what can I do to be better, or what can we do as a leadership team to see how we can support that and still be successful? And in some cases, look, and this is going to be a controversial statement when I say this. Sometimes you have to say, is the business evolving past my level of leadership, and is it the right time to pass the baton?
Yeah.
To make sure the business can be taken to the next level.
And yeah, we see that a lot, right? Julie, any thoughts on this? What you see out there on the front lines?
Yeah, as Rick was talking, I thought of all sorts of things, right? One of the things that I thought that I think I've mentioned before even is doing work remotely and doing something that is an established process is one thing. COVID tested everybody in that respect. But then doing work that involves change management, or rejiggering how things go, that's not everybody's cup of tea. And
Yeah.
some folks have it in their DNA. A lot of consultancies do. We're used to doing those things and being agile, but agile is something that there's a lot of resistance to, and being able to actually change how you do work and do it without much face to face, I think is a bigger element of challenge.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing you made me think. And then I do think there are elements of, fairness in the workplace. So, how do you address the obvious ones are, manufacturing folks have to be on the shop floor usually to do their jobs. other folks don't. But what if somebody has a work style that is really amenable to remote work and someone else just doesn't have that inner discipline and they work best when they're not remote? You have to be able to protect yourself from unfair practices, let's say, or figure out how do you navigate that. And how do you navigate the fact that, I know I'm seeing an increasing number of folks that are employed full time somewhere, and yet them to be doing gig work on the side. And I think if their employers were to know, they would be rather disappointed with that because it's probably not relegated to evening hours. So there's just so many angles, right, to discuss about working remotely or working in the office.
Have you ever wondered what really makes a generation tick? Who gets to pick the name? And why the slang keeps changing? Don't worry, I can help. My name's Dr. Megan Grace. On hashtag Gen Z, I share the voices and experiences of Generation Z, how they're different from other generations, what moves them, and why they do what they do. In each episode, we go beyond the buzzwords and the stereotypes to dive into real conversations and the insights that matter to making intergenerational collaboration a reality. You can catch hashtag Gen Z on the Work Defined Podcast Network and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey there, I'm Tim Boris, host of the Working Well podcast, where business strategy meets human sustainability. If you're an executive, a leader, or change maker ready to ditch burnout, build thriving teams, and drive real results, this is your next must listen. Tune in on the Work Defined Network or at timboris.com/podcast.
I think, Julie, to tie to that, I agree with it 100%. There's never going to be a right size fits all for all businesses. Every business has its own culture, right? And every time you add a new person or a new country or that kind of evolve, your culture has to evolve from that. I do agree that creating equitable opportunities for all employees. So there are organizations, for example, like manufacturing, that are going to require employees to be physically there. And so how do you allow the office staff to work remotely and not the manufacturing staff? And you have to have policies and procedures and honestly frank conversations with teams and poll your teams to see how they feel about that. There are, to your point, there are people who work better in office settings.
Yeah.
And so that hybrid work, even within my own organizations, we still have individuals that come into offices.
That's right.
And because they don't either have the space at home or they have children at home or they just need the space. They want to get out. They want to have that disconnect from their home and from their work life. So I think looking at it from an objective perspective where employees can help choose, that hybrid component can be very successful. But I do think that where you may have one size fits all, I think that's the organization. I think being upfront with that. Manufacturing, like, hey, we're just in the office all day, and that's just what we do. I think you have to, as a culture, you have to kind of question yourself: does that make sense for us? Does it make sense for the staff? And if it makes sense for everybody, how do we make sure we implement that and it's very crystal clear in our policies and our procedures?
How much does culture play a role, Rick? I mean, in what you're doing when it comes to that, right? I mean, obviously it has to fit the culture, it has to fit the mission, but any thoughts on that?
It really just making sure that everyone's aligned with the culture. I mean, there are a lot of studies out there that employees have maybe felt disconnected because the typical forms of communication on vision, mission, task was in a forum on a Monday morning, and now it's an email. And some people don't really connect to emails the way they would do with someone in person.
Right.
And so I think organizations are having to find a way to better communicate and make sure employees are involved and understand what's going on. We went from having a town hall on once a quarter to having them every other week, just to make sure employees were very much involved and understood what's going on.
Right.
We also created forums where employees can ask anonymous questions, and then we brought that to the forum when we had our town halls. So, and that's worked really successful for us, and that's gotten our employees engaged and connected to the business. But again, not every business has evolved from that. But getting that feedback from staff of what's your best way of communication? What's the way that you want to be communicated to? We have to ask those questions. And I think leaders also have to be open to criticism in that approach as well.
No, agreed. Yeah, and I think it what bums me out is I think firms should be looking at remote work as more of a flexibility enabler. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think there's this idea that there's a lack of productivity when people are remote. And from much of the research that I've done, that's not entirely true. yeah, people can abuse it. Sure, people can kind of get lost out there. But the reality of it is, like you said, there are people who fundamentally thrive in that sort of. I know I do. I've worked remote for now close to. I was thinking about it yesterday, over 15 years in some capacity, and I really have learned to thrive in that. But you're right, it's not for everyone. But rather than look at it as a flexibility enabler, it's almost being used as kind of like for example, we saw an article recently about maybe return to office are layoffs in sheep's clothing, right? Just a false flag, so to speak, right? But what do you think about that, right? Like balancing that sort of flexibility enabler with needing to manage what the business needs are and at the same time accommodate, the outcomes that the business has to have and make everyone happy. What do you think about that? Is return to office a layoff in sheep's clothing? And how do you balance that with flexibility?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question to ask. And I think I'm not going to give a blanket statement on that. I think that every business is a little bit different. I think businesses are also being strategic as well of how do we get people back in the space. And if they don't want to be part of that vision mission, they're saying, look, this is this is the culture that we're looking at building. If you don't want to be part of that, we understand, but this is what the direction we're going. And so does that feel like layoffs? Look, I think every business is looking at being savvy in a certain way. But I also think that if a business is looking to build a vision and mission within the organization, they're going to say very clearly, we need everyone on the boat. And everyone on the boat needs to be rowing north if we're going north. And so if we have individuals who are not looking to be part of that culture or be part of that overall strategy the way that we're intending it to be, then we can't have you as part of that. So I can understand from that perspective where they expect some turnover from from there. But I'm not sure that a business is being malicious from there. I think that they understand that, hey, we're going to have some turnover from that, and if we have some turnover, it may be beneficial for the business. But I'm not sure it's to actually cause layoffs from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully not, right?
I know you'll post, the link to the article that you're mentioning, but
Yeah.
since folks maybe haven't seen it, like it literally was a short article that was written that said, well, our company is using our return to office in hopes that folks will leave because they don't want to do that. And then it had a couple of interesting other trends, that it called out as well from certain large organizations like Google, who's going to factor in their willingness to be in person into their performance evaluation, right? Or just kind of like all these different positions that are being, spoken. And of course, we know oftentimes they're retracted too, right? They sound like a great idea, but then they're not. And so just for that alone, I would just encourage folks who just want to see some of this stuff to look at your notes, your show notes, and check out the articles.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely share it. I mean, I think it's a good idea for everyone to kind of look at these things and see what's sort of being out there and how companies are going about this. And the interesting thing about return to office, I've talked to some I would say earlier career folks, like just anecdotally in some let's just call it research. And I find that a lot of folks are saying like, well, I'm coming back to the office, but I find it's just a few of us in the office, and we're largely just communicating on Zoom. Right. Well, what's the point of that? If you're coming into the office, right, you ought to be together and make the most of that. So I almost wonder if there's a management layer and a process. There certainly should be for return to office, because to me that's a bit of a change, right? There should be some change management to that. But I think you have to give people the tools to be able to be successful in that environment. And Rick, I know this is near and dear to your heart. This is something that I believe is your mission over there at Helios, right? Like, how does technology help with this? How do you use technology? How are you guys seeing companies use technology to support them in this way?
Yeah, I think that one, it's just engagement as well. I think, when we think about Helios and what we're doing here, is we don't want employees just to log in, just to look at the pay slip or to
Yeah.
review, put their PTO in place. What we want is that, this is a true global workforce management platform where your communication, your community building, your languages are there so that you're fostering kind of this engagement with your overall team in all aspects of kind of the life cycle from an employee perspective.
Yeah.
And so we think that, look, the biggest challenges that we found with remote work are making sure everyone knows, when someone's working, making sure that they're respectful of those hours, especially on a global perspective. U.S. companies working with individuals in Europe or in Asia or other time zones, they were expecting them to work their business hours. And so, we brought some technology into this where it's, identifying, employees to say, look, I'm working, but these are my hours. Or if it's languages, hey, these are the languages that I speak. So if the company's communicating mission, vision, and goals, that can be translated directly in our platform and displayed to the employee in their local language as well, outside of English. We're very much focused on automation too. So how do you make sure you're building culture by building trust within your teams? So as you're onboarding your employees, making sure that they are confident in the technology solutions that you're choosing and that it's fully compliant, and you're explaining benefits or contracts or kind of just information you need to collect directly within the platform, and it's not having to create a back and forth with employees. So the workflows, the automation, we really focused on that. We got a lot of feedback from beta testers and analyst groups who basically came back and said, look, here are the challenges that the global workforce is seeing in companies who have hybrid or global or remote
Mhm.
teams. How do you automate this? How do you streamline this and make it feel like one organization, like how they would feel if they were onboarding in an office? If you guys remember how that used to feel, printing out documents and onboarding. How do you make sure they feel the warm and fuzzy through that process? And so we were very much focused in bringing that together, building community within our systems, and allow companies to really focus on what they do best, which is growing their businesses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's outstanding. You mentioned earlier about, you kind of made the comment about firms that are doing it right. Like what are the key characteristics that you see of companies that are getting remote work right and actually are thriving? We heard the comment by Eric Schmidt about, the innovation is being suppressed. But like, how do you see companies? What are kind of the key things you see for those that are successful in maintaining that innovation? And
Yeah, I think here's the thing. I think you can't, a leader cannot say, you guys made a comment earlier from the article earlier, and it gave me chills when I heard it, which was employees won't get promotions if they work remotely.
yeah,
That's not right.
I know, right?
yeah,
You need to build a culture where everyone has an equitable opportunity for success. The person that's working remotely tend to, and again, the data shows this, that they are working more. They're getting things done faster. They're not focusing on, I have to get ready for work. I have to go to, take a train or take a car. I'm not going to commute for an hour and a half. I can wake up, I can be refreshed, I'm not stressed out, and now I can get right into work and get things done. And I can do it in a more accurate time frame, and I have the ability to do that and spend time with my family. That you're seeing the success that comes out of that. So when you hear leaders say, "Look, they're not going to get promotions," or "Those employees we're not going to give opportunities to," look, we understand that there's a bias that comes with that. It's always easier when you are connected to someone in an office space and you work with them on a day-to-day basis and you see what they do. But there is technology out there, and by the way, also just common sense, like one-on-ones with your leadership team or your teams, to really understand what they're doing. When I hear leaders say those type of statements, it tells me that they don't have the right they don't have the right foundational kind of aspects of how they manage and work with their teams to find out what they need to find out to make sure that the teams are supported and operating correctly. And again, that bothers me a little bit, but I think that as they're building these particular cultures, they need to be able to say, what are we looking to accomplish, and what tools do we need to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success?
yeah, agreed. Yeah, I like the way you said that. I mean, I think it comes back to the leadership, right? It's like creating that environment, that process, that, methodology for how we're going to engage people and allow them to, accommodate their flexible needs, but also make sure we get done what we're doing, or achieve our goals. But like, what advice would you give? 'Cause I think part of it is having regular communication, having that open dialogue, understanding each other. Because I think you're right. Like sometimes you think of like front of mind, back of mind, right? If someone's never in the office, I never see them, are they going to fade to the back of mind? Well, that's my fault as a leader for not staying engaged with them. But like, how do you maintain a personal connection in this new world, right? If everybody's all over the place, it is hard on the leader, right? I mean, you're already juggling a lot. Many of our frontline leaders are, but how do you do that? How do you keep that personal connection?
I'm giving this advice from the many, many mistakes and cuts and wounds that I have made
Yeah.
in my career. I've never been a perfect leader. I've had my challenges and still have my challenges. But what I've realized is that you walk in with respect. You also give the time. Even today, we had a new employee start here at Helios on our product team, and she had reached out and said, "Hey, I would love to, get to, talk to you for 10 minutes." I was absolutely thrilled for that. I connected. I asked a little bit about herself, and I found where we had some connection. And I said, this is how we're going to make sure that we can leverage. She's from Colombia. My fiance is from Colombia. So I was like, oh, that's how we're going to connect. And we were able to engage that way and then build trust and on a great foundation of how we're going to operate going forward. Like it's just building those relationships. I think sometimes sometimes people look at employees as numbers and not look at them as human. We have to remember that they're human and that there's always a way that you can engage with your teams, find out what they're doing. I'm not saying be friends with your staff. I don't think that you have to have a line between that. But I think really understanding the human factor of who they are, what they may be going through, and how you can leverage them to be a partner, not just an employee and a manager, but a partner. In doing that, if it's regular check-ins, if it's your one-on-ones, if it's weekly or every other week, start the conversation off by,
Yeah.
hey, just checking, how are you? How are you doing? That extra 5 minutes in doing that, I've seen it be more successful. I have been in the past that manager that jumped in and said, we're talking about business and that's all we're talking about. And it was very cold. And I've had to learn that to be a better leader, I have to make sure I'm investing into the time with my teams. And if I'm investing time with my teams are going to invest in time with me. And that has always worked out very well since I changed that mentality years ago.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. You're right. And I think, I don't know if everyone's a fan of Gary Vee, but I was listening to him one time in a speech and he was saying, as leaders, you have to know what motivates every single one of what their lens is, right? What is the lens that they're bringing to work with which they're trying, the things they're trying to accomplish, and helping them accomplish that in context of what you're trying to accomplish. I think it's a give take, right? A win-win.
Yeah. And I think that having an idea
Yeah.
that all the best talent is in your postal code. Like
Yeah.
we want to get over those biases as well. When we talk about remote work, allowing employees to have the freedom to work wherever. There are tools and solutions out there, like an employer of record solution, like a global payroll, or even a contractor pay solution, where employees now have the ability to truly work anywhere at any time. And if a good leader can manage that team, they can manage expectations. If they can manage expectations, the job gets done. I don't believe you have to have someone clock in and clock out. Now, that doesn't work for not every employer. But if you're talking about those who are working remotely, the clock in, clock out, have to watch the clock from 8 to 5. That's a really old school mentality. If an employee is able to do the 8 hours worth of work that I asked them to get done, they got it done in 6 hours. Good.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of the day. You did exactly what I needed you to do. And I may give you more work going forward. But I know that I'm not going to hold them to the fire for 2 extra hours if they were able to get that 8 hours worth of work done.
Yeah.
So it's just really you've got to evolve. We as leaders have to evolve to the world that we're in. And if you start looking at even the Gen Z kind of expectations, if you don't change or we don't evolve, those businesses are going to fail because the new generation that's coming in, they came into the workforce with remote work. They came into the
Right.
workforce having more flexibility. And if they feel like they don't get that, you're going to have a tough time finding talent to support your overall organization.
I'm not always the first to evolve, but I think I evolved pretty decently. But I have to tell you, there's something about the concept of, what should be gig work. If you're really looking at bidding work by the job, and your comment was, if I give them 6 hours of work or 8 hours and they get it done in six, then like, hey, two on you, right? And that might be okay if they're a gig worker, but where that becomes really problematic for me is where then and I think we do have a generational issue where there are generations growing up saying, well, this job's not that hard. And so I can actually maintain two jobs and I'm not giving either one of them my full time and attention. And there have to be ways for companies to protect against that. I'm not expecting somebody to take part of my full-time salary, work world and apply it to finding or doing full-time salary work for somebody else. And that's balance to me. Yes, folks have to evolve and think more flexibly about work, but I like to think that that's maybe it's flexible enough that when then that employee comes to you and says, my kids, like Valentine's class thing is tomorrow at 3 and I have to leave. Well, like, isn't that tit for tat enough? To not be the clock hound. So it goes both ways, and to me, that's the challenge of the new world and the new way of work is being flexible without either party taking advantage? And how do you either teach managers to be able to do what's right and what's fair and feel like they're getting a full shake for the salary, and yet, move off of the, it's clock time dime where they need to?
Before we move on, I need to let you know about my friend Mark Pfeffer and his show, People Tech. If you're looking for the latest on product development, marketing, funding, big deals happening in talent acquisition, HR, HCM, that's the show you need to listen to. Go to the Work Defined Network, search up People Tech, Mark Pfeffer. You can find him anywhere.
Are you tired of talent and HR podcasts that sound like corporate training videos? Same. Talentless is the no-fluff show about hiring, leadership, culture, and what's actually going on in the world of work. Talentless is a podcast for recruiters by recruiters. Hosted by Desiree Goldie and Ashley King, they're smart, occasionally salty, and never afraid to say what everyone else is thinking. Listen wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe at talentlesspodcast.com.
I think we have to understand that some work, especially with technology, is getting done a lot faster. You can see the data resources from ChatGPT. Organizations who were allowing, people were getting things done a lot faster with ChatGPT or even BI reporting than they used to have to do manually, like in Excel files or actually writing out reports. And so businesses have to evolve. That doesn't mean that you penalize the employee because they found a better way to get it done. I think this is where that communication comes in, and say, okay, look, now we know that what historically may have taken 4 hours to do, now it only takes 20 minutes to do. So now I have a different expectation with my staff, and in this role, what they can actually accomplish. Having those strategic conversations, that also helps you go, well, do I need to have 5 people do this job? Do I may only need 2 now because there's we have technology that we can can make this job get done a lot faster. I agree. There needs to be a balance. You don't want employees to take advantage of you from that. I've actually seen that happen before, where I had an employee who was working for me, and we found out they were also working another job as well. Now we communicated with them. We're like, hey, you're supposed to be working during these hours for us. Now, if you were taking off for your family or you were taking off for other things, I think that would be understandable. But you're actually working another job. We then came to the conclusion with that particular employee that they were abusing the system, and we had to let them go.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I don't want to penalize an employee for finding a better way to do it. I can say now I'm going to figure out how to leverage you to do more, because I still want that 8 hours, or I want to at least get close to that. But now I know that that job that I expected maybe took 4 hours it has gotten done in 20 minutes. Maybe I'm going to figure out a way that we can leverage you and your talent, because you're finding ways to do things more effectively for us.
Yeah. And even maybe initially or at times it's the employee finding some of those tools and ways, but generally it's the organization that's paying and investing in technologies and training and putting things in. And the premise of that investment is absolutely that it makes the workers more efficient. So if you're an employee that's, gotten tools or have tools or even found yourself how to use tools differently, you can't perpetually expect that, that is a 4-hour book of work, like your car mechanic, right? And so if I can now get it done in 15 minutes, then I got a 4-hour gimme for perpetuity. It's just not reasonable.
Yeah.
It costs a lot to get into some of these things, right?
Yeah, Rick, when you think about, we talked a little bit about some, how firms, what the characteristics are of firms doing it right. What are some of the mistakes you think companies make with remote work, and how do you measure that to make sure that you're doing it right?
Well, I think having the right KPIs or OKRs in place, I think it's important, and then validating kind of what's getting done. We've built, even in Helios, we built kind of a top-down and bottom-up goal management part of our platform, where you come up with your company your policies and goals for the year, and then you're able to tie all of your organization and department goals to those particular goals. So, for example, when I'm presenting to my staff and I say, I need you to do X, Y, Z. My staff can see how that actually, from a tree perspective, how that actually ties up. And if it doesn't tie up, we actually tell our teams to challenge that, and we say, tell us, we tested this out. We actually threw a couple dummy goals in there where we were going over their staff and to see how they were going to respond. And it was exactly what we asked for. We asked them, they said, hey, how does this tie into my North Star? If my bonus is tied to the company, success, and this goal has nothing to do with my bonus, why am I focusing on this? Anything that we're doing needs to be going to the North Star. So it was really good feedback from that. But we were able to manage that and visualize that, communicate that to our teams so they understood how it was going to connect. And then we were able to measure that on a quarterly basis with them of where we're at as a company. And so we saw that it started to spark within our organization was if we weren't hitting a particular goal, our staff were asking, what are we not doing to make sure that that goal is moving? So then they start to look at the goals that were tied to that. And then we start to see that push to make sure that goal was able to get accomplished. So it's communicating, having the right tool sets to validate what you're doing, and then making sure that you have checkpoints, if it's monthly or quarterly, and what those overall goals are to make sure you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. It's good stuff, man. I appreciate the insights. I could keep asking you questions all day, man. Just to kind of round this out, I wanted to ask you one other thing, because I actually think, just seeing what you guys have been building and what you've been doing, I think you're doing a really interesting job of what I would call localizing culture, right? You've put some real emphasis on the nuances of each country. Holidays and are obvious, but there's other things too. But like, how do you do that? How does technology sort of help to influence and shape culture, and can you localize it entirely? Right? Is that I don't know if that's the right way to say it, right? Localizing culture, but there is a certain localization element to every culture in a business and the experience of each employee. But how does that work? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the biggest feedback that we were getting, our case studies and our beta testers and even some of our analysts, was that most of the HR technology out there is very US focused.
Yes.
And so when you go abroad, you're having to have employees take their culture and put it into the US box.
Yeah. Square peg, round hole.
Yeah, that's not the best experience for employees. They actually feel like, at least the feedback that we've gotten was, they feel like second class citizens.
Yeah.
Because they realize that their cultures sometimes are not being respected, and what they're used to, and from an employee onboarding perspective, or even from just a utilization of how they actually leverage technology in those particular markets. And so what we were focused on was, okay, what similarities do if not most of the countries have in regards to onboarding? So that 75 to 80% similarity. And then we built that 20 to 25% delta, that we focused on that and said, how do we localize that? So the way that an employee onboards in Japan, and the way that an employee onboards in the UK can feel localized to them, but it's still getting that kind of the essence from a business perspective, from an administrator perspective, of what that's going to, how they can leverage data and how they can manage data within the technology platform. But for the employee, it felt very localized. Little things, we were saying, like even our announcements where companies can, say happy birthday or happy anniversary. In India, we change happy birthday to happy returns day, because that's what they say in India, right? So we made sure that little nuances like that were there, so employees felt their cultures were respected. Languages, our platform is launching with 50 languages, but we can add a language within 3 days within our entire platform.
Wow.
If a client requests it. So we've built, those are foundational pieces to us. And then also, even with our AI, we were very much focused on not AI, not just being a tool or like an HR assistant to our customers, but we were able to say, look, how do we localize this for our client base? How do we make sure employees have access to that as well and can ask questions? So we've got our foundational parts of our AI, but we've also got our customizable pieces where clients can embed their own cultural nuances into our AI, so that when employees have questions, it's within that same realm that the customer is used to communicating within their organization. And then they've been localizing that as well. If it's language, if it's kind of tone, we've been able to kind of automate that within our AI environment as well. So we really thought about the employee experience. And even another thing, Pete, which I know you're aware of, even like our mobile app, we decided not to launch a mobile app today, because we wanted to see how our employees were engaging within our technology and what was important to them, and then looking at like that data on a global scale and then on a regional scale and then a country scale, and then seeing what's going to be the best bang for our buck as we invest into our mobile technology, and also localizing some of the UI UX behind that as well for certain markets like Japan and China, which we know it's very different than kind of the Western kind of UI UX experience. So we really methodically have thought about this a lot. It's taken about a year, a little over a year to kind of build out our overall technology. And although we're launching in October, we're super excited about, even what the next evolution of that's going to be as our clients get into the platform, because we want to make sure that we're tearing it apart as well and continue to build on that global but local kind of overall experience.
Yeah, I love that. HR is so local. It's so nuanced, and it is so personal, right? I appreciate all that you're taking there. So look, what just kind of looking ahead, like what can we expect from Helios, and how do we connect with you guys?
They can definitely look us up at www.helios.io. Again, that's helios.io. You will also be able to, we're very heavy on LinkedIn. We do these podcasts. We do a lot of webinars as well. So they can definitely follow us on LinkedIn at helios/io. And then, they can always reach out to me directly. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. Again, my mission is to help people. So I always ask if anyone has any questions or anyone wants to reach out to me directly, they can always do that to my LinkedIn. I tend to respond to everyone. Sometimes it takes a day or two to get back to you guys, but it's really there. I'm here to help people. I really want to make sure that we're creating equitable opportunities. And I've said that a few times, but I think it's really important. When we build technology, we build structures and processes and procedures. I want to be able to have that first-time founder CEO who's never hired a person in their life to that 20-year payroll professional be in our platform, be in our solution, and say, I know how to do this. It's easy, and it's made my job a lot easier. That's what I want to make sure we're accomplishing, and that they actually have the ability to expand and manage the global teams.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. I think it's an excellent mission, and I appreciate your open door policy. I always love conversating with you, and I learn something every time. Okay, so launching in October. Any sneak peeks for what we can expect after that in 2025?
Well, there's much to come.
Yeah.
I will say that we've got some major integration partners that we're going to be announcing
Nice.
at the beginning of the year. So stay tuned to that. But our goal here again is to simplify global expansion, global management of global teams. So there are some major partnerships. I'm not going to give them all away. We're still building the integrations out, but you will see that when we say we've taken this to the next level, we have taken this to the next level.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think it looks great, and I think it's going to be really, really, really differentiated piece of technology out there. So yeah, be sure to check it out and look for Rick and I. We just did some recordings, some fun recordings here in Atlanta on Monday. Myself, Rick, the ladies, Jess and Jess from LeapGen at Mercer. So there's gonna be some cool content. We did some really neat conversations. So look for that too. Rick's insights are always super, super helpful. And Rick, thank you, man. We really appreciate you coming on.
No, pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me, bro.
It took too long, man. We gotta bring you back.
Hey, we made it in before October, before the launch. So I think we're doing pretty good.
We did.
Happy to be there. Happy to be here for you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And we'll talk to you guys soon.